Right guys, welcome to this video on what is a balanced diet. Now I know that this subject is really controversial and there's loads of people that have loads of different opinions about what effective nutrition is. So what I'm going to try and do in this video is give you some of the absolute basics so that you can begin to get your own head around nutrition and diet and what you're supposed to be eating and what you're supposed to be avoiding. So with that said, let's dive in and see what we can discover. Okay, so let's begin with something called the Eatwell Guide. Now, the Eatwell Guide is a guide to nutrition and healthy eating produced by the UK government. Now, wherever you are in the world, it's very likely that your government has produced something similar. A guide to what they believe to be effective nutrition, the right proportions of different nutrients and so on. But we're going to focus in this video on the UK government's guide, which is known as the Eatwell Guide. Now, I've already mentioned that there are some disputes, and those disputes are pretty long-standing as to whether this is in fact the best way to construct a diet. I'm not going to get into that in this video. I'm just going to present to you simply what the UK government says is an effective diet. In a later video, perhaps, we'll discuss some of the other issues around nutrition. It's a very, very heated area for debate, and I don't want to get into the debate in this video. So let me just present to you what the Eatwell Guide suggests is good eating. So the first thing that our diet should consist in, or one of the most important components, according to the Eatwell Guide, is fruit and veg. So the UK government suggests that we should eat at least 5 portions of fruit and veg every single day, and that ideally those should be different fruit and vegetables. So a bit of variety is needed. The second major part of our diet, according to the Eatwell Guide, is to include a pretty significant volume of starchy carbohydrates, starchy carbs. So we're talking about things like potatoes, bread, rice, pasta, and similar things. And the UK government suggests that we should choose whole grain options and any options with higher fibre for digestion reasons, but also any options with less added fat and as little as possible in terms of added salt and added sugar. So that might be, for example, brown or whole grain bread rather than white bread, for example. The next part of the Eatwell Guide is beans, pulses, fish, eggs, and meat. So essentially we're talking about different sources of protein here. And the government suggests that we should eat more beans and pulses, 2 portions of fish per week, one of which they suggest should be oily fish. And that overall our protein requirements, we should try and avoid getting our protein from red meat and processed meat. So the suggestion is we eat more white meats like chicken, for example, if we are going to be eating meat. Again, the meat issue is not something I'm going to get into in this video because I know it's very heated and pretty convoluted. So what else does the Eatwell Guide suggest? We're also suggested to have some dairy and or alternatives to dairy. And the government simply advises us in terms of our dairy choices to try and choose lower fat options and also low sugar options. So for example, in yogurts, there is often an absolute load of sugar put into yogurts. So try and choose low fat options if possible, according to the Eatwell Guide. Also, in terms of cooking, for example, or spreads that we use, we should try and keep the oils and spreads that we use to a minimum. And then in terms of the types of oils and spreads that we use, we're advised to choose unsaturated oils and to use them in small amounts. So I'm not going to get into in this video what the difference between unsaturated and saturated oils are, but we'll do that in a later video. What else then does the Eatwell Guide suggest? So the Eatwell Guide also suggests the importance of water, and we're advised to take in 6 to 8 glasses of water per day. So the fluid intake requirement is quite high because water makes up somewhere around about, certainly water with the body fluids, makes up somewhere around about 60% of an adult's body. So water is really important. And the government suggests for us, water is probably the best thing to drink, and then perhaps lower fat milk and any sugar-free drinks like tea and coffee. In terms of drinks, the government suggests we should try and avoid fruit juices, or if we do have fruit juices and smoothies, we should limit them to a total of 150 millilitres per day. So that's approximately 150 millilitres is approximately equivalent to half a standard soda can, half a standard can of pop if you're from the West Midlands. Okay, so it's not very much, and that is the suggestion, that we limit fruit juices and smoothies to that amount. Finally then, and outside of the kind of the oval shape here, and I think it's deliberately put to one side in the diagram that the government has produced for us, deliberately put to one side to suggest that as much as possible we should avoid anything that's high in fat, high in salt, and or high in sugar. So things like ice creams, sweets, biscuits, crisps, chocolate, ketchup, those kinds of things. And we're suggested to eat them as little as possible. And when we do eat them, to eat them in small amounts. So try, for example, to avoid eating chocolate if you possibly can. I know it's hard for many of us, but try and avoid eating chocolate if you possibly can. And if you do eat chocolate, not to just binge through an enormous chocolate bar, for example. So that's the Eatwell guide, and like I say, there's dispute about a lot of the different issues that are here, but this is simply a presentation of what the UK government suggests to us makes up a healthy, balanced diet. So now this brings us to reference intake. So we've talked about the proportions of what we should eat according to the UK government. We've talked about how proportionately carbs, proteins, fats should fit together in a healthy diet, but we haven't talked about the overall total volume of food we're supposed to eat. And this is where reference intake comes in. So simply, on a daily basis, and we're going to split the reference intake, the total amount of calories that a person should eat, we're going to split along the lines of sex. So males and females, males are recommended, their recommended or reference intake for males in the UK is 2,500 calories per day. And that equates to around about 10,500 kilojoules. So I know, for example, in Australia, kilojoules tend to be the go-to measure of energy in food, whereas in the UK we tend more often to use kilocalories, which we usually just refer to as calories. So for a male, the daily reference intake is 2,500 calories, 10,500 kilojoules. They're just two different ways of measuring the energy in the food that we eat. For females, on the other hand, it's slightly less, due to the average size of a female being smaller than that of a male. So for females, the daily reference intake is 2,000 calories. And then in terms of kilojoules, it's 8,300 kilojoules. So that is obviously going to vary according to the body size and the metabolic rate of the individuals we're talking about. These are averages across enormous populations. So 2,500 calories for men, 2,000 calories for women. You will also have seen on food labels something similar to this. So this is now a requirement by law in the UK that packaged foods include somewhere on the packaging this guide, this reference intake guide, which indicates both the total energy, and you can see in the white section there, the total energy is recorded both in kilojoules and also in calories. It's required that packaged food includes the total energy of that foodstuff, but also a breakdown according to the fat that's in it, the saturates, which is a subcategory of fat, the sugars, which is a subcategory of carbohydrates, and the salt. And the colour coding indicates for that foodstuff how it fits into the requirements of the Eatwell plate. So if, for example, the Eatwell plate suggests that we have a low amount of fat in our diet, this foodstuff, the example on the screen now, this foodstuff also is low in fat, and therefore it's colour coded green, as in green for go. It's a traffic light system. So green means this is fine as far as the Eatwell plate is concerned because it's low in fat. It's also low in that subcategory of fat called saturates, which gets the thumbs up essentially from the UK government that this is something that is okay as far as the Eatwell plate the Eatwell guide, is concerned. However, you will notice that sugars here are in red. So this suggests that this foodstuff, whatever it might be, is high in sugar, and therefore the red is indicating to the consumer, to the person who's going to be eating it, that there's lots of sugars in this. So it might just remind you, if I'm having this piece of food, whatever it might be, perhaps I'll avoid that chocolate later because that's going to push me quite high in terms of the sugar intake for today. So these are supposed to help us manage the intake of those elements of the Eatwell guide. Help us to manage the amount of fat that we eat, manage the amount of carbohydrate and sugars that we eat, and so on. And so we've also got here that it's a medium amount of salt. So again, the government suggests that we try and limit our salt intake if we possibly can. It also gives us at the bottom of the graphic, it gives us a percentage, and that percentage relates to those daily intakes that are on the left of the screen. So these percentages relate to, so let's take the sugars for example. It says 38%. What that means is that if you eat this foodstuff that this traffic light system is stuck onto on the packaging, if you eat this thing, or eat a serving of 150 grams, as it says at the top, if you eat that, you will be consuming 38% of your total advised reference intake. Okay, so you've hit about 40% of what the government suggests you should be eating in terms of sugars for that particular day. So the idea of the reference intake is to give you a bit of a guideline, a bit of a clue as to how much of each thing you should be eating and how each individual piece of food contributes to the overall Eatwell guide, to the overall totals of fats and proteins and saturates and sugars and so on. And you'll see these, it's now a legal requirement for most packaged foods to have this on them, so that you can, the idea is that you can be informed about what you're eating as part of your diet. Okay, so we spent a decent bit of time there talking about what a healthy diet looks like as far as the UK government is concerned. But why do they spend so much time and money and energy and fund so much science into healthy eating? Well, the reason for that is because a healthy diet has numerous benefits. The first of which is that a healthy diet enables our immune system to function effectively. Without a healthy immune system, we're at risk of all sorts of different kinds of diseases. And the nutrients that come from our food are absolutely essential and critical for maintaining a healthy immune function. Secondly, a healthy diet enables us to manage our weight. So if we're looking to gain weight, to maintain weight, to lose weight of whatever sort, then our diet is an absolutely critical element to managing our weight. And so the government suggests certain things that you might want to do. The government guidelines include things like having a low fat diet or a low sugar diet and so on, as means to being able to control your overall weight. Now, there are all sorts of different arguments around weight management and body image and so on, which I'm not going to get into in this video, simply to say that a diet is probably the most significant factor in your overall weight management. There are other things as well, like exercise, obviously, and mood and life circumstances and all sorts of things will affect your weight, but a diet probably has the most significant impact, and it's worth bearing that in mind. And then obviously, as a consequence of improved immune function and better weight management, we're also at lower risk of all sorts of different kinds of diseases. And in the previous video, we talked about something called hypokinetic diseases, and I'll put a link just now above. You can go and watch that video. But disease risk is reduced when we eat a healthy diet. We reduce things like, for example, hypertension, coronary heart disease, those sorts of things, having good cholesterol rather than bad cholesterol in our systems. Okay, so we've talked about what a healthy diet is supposedly made up of. According to the UK government, we've talked about the total volume of energy that you're supposed to be intaking on a daily basis. But how do you actually go about tweaking or managing that diet? What are the strategies that you can use to ensure that you stay within guidelines? So the first thing is the timings of your meals. And two things under this heading. First of all, it's suggested that breakfast is an important meal. And the reason for that is if you eat breakfast, you're less likely to snack during the day. And the problem with snacking during the day is that, generally speaking, the snacks that we choose to eat tend to be sugary. They tend to be chocolate bars and fruit and nut bars that have been wedged together with treacle and all that sort of thing. So if we can avoid those by having a good breakfast, then that's a good strategy to avoid overconsumption of sugar, for example. The second timing strategy is not to eat too close to bedtime, because that can interfere with the quality of your sleep, interfere with blood sugar levels and so on, and can affect how well you sleep. And sleep has also been shown to have a pretty significant impact on health long term. So a good dietary strategy is to have breakfast and also not to eat too late before too close to going to bed. The next thing is portion control, not eating too much of certain food groups and not eating too little of others. So the Eatwell guide suggests that the majority of the diet, in fact about 2/3 of the diet, should be made up of fruit and veg and carbohydrates. So if you can manage your portions to line up with the Eatwell plate, it's therefore suggested that your diet would be healthier. Next is the 5 a day idea. Again, I'm not going to go over this in too much detail. We've mentioned it already. The argument is in the UK that we should be eating 5 different kinds of fruit and veg per day. That's not 5 kinds of fruit and 5 kinds of veg, but 5 in total. So a couple of different kinds of fruit and maybe 3 different vegetables per day. Also, it's suggested that we should try and cut down on our salt intake. Salt has a knock-on impact in terms of blood pressure, for example. So if we're eating too much salt, we're at risk of increasing our blood pressure, which is known as hypertension. And since a lot of the salt we eat is already in the foods that we eat, generally speaking, you don't need to add salt to enhance flavour. Now, if you're a chef, you might be annoyed at me saying that, because salt is obviously an important component in the food that we produce and taste and so on. But it is important to note that too much salt can have a knock-on impact in terms of hypertension, blood pressure and so on. So use it sparingly if you possibly can. Finally, make some switches. Can you opt for different, more healthy alternatives? So again, going back to the Eatwell guide, the Eatwell guide would suggest switching high sugar or high fat with low sugar or low fat substitutes or options. So the most obvious one, most people, unless you're vegan, most people consume milk most days, maybe have it in their breakfast cereal or have it in teas and coffees and so on. The suggestion would be from the Eatwell guide to switch from whole milk to skimmed milk. And that's one way of reducing the overall fat intake and sugar intake from the milk. There's lots of different low fat options, low sugar options that are on the shelves these days that you can switch those other options for. So that's just a bit of a brief intro into what is an absolutely massive subject, really convoluted, complicated and disputed subject. But I hope that's been helpful initially to just begin thinking about what makes up a diet, and what the UK government at least suggests is an appropriate healthy diet. Don't forget to like the video. Don't forget to subscribe, and leave me some comments in the comments section if you've got further questions, or if there's anything you'd like me to clarify from this video. But thanks for watching. See you next time.